Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Hellbent in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 16, They Want Blood. Genma meets with the other Takubitsu Jonin and Irika on Thursday night for drinks. Once upon a time it had been a weekly thing, getting together to talk shit and bemoan hard missions and flirt with other ninja at the bar. Well, more specifically, Genma and Anko did most of the flirting. Radu had been in a relationship with a pretty Chunin for nearly 2 years now, and Irika was always too busy to date. Before the shit show that was the Chunin exams attack, they'd been on a mission to try and get the school teacher to actually unwind and take someone home with him. That probably would be a lesser priority tonight than simply getting wasted, Gemma thinks. He's arrived at the bar first, which is not unusual for him, but the subdued atmosphere of off-duty certainly is. The low lighting, scratched tables, and countertops, questionable cleanliness and cheap drinks are pretty standard, but the crowds of shinobi taking a break from their violent lives are quiet and reserved. It's a shinobi bar, for God's sake, Genma bemoans. Where are the kunao throwing competitions, the arm wrestling matches, the fist fights? Sulking slightly, Genma orders a glass of plum wine from the server while he waits for the others. He supposes that the death of a Hokage and the near destruction of the entire village is reason enough for the quiet of his favorite drinking establishment, but he still hates it. He was hoping for a chance to get away from the mess this past month has been, not a reminder of it. On one hand, he's definitely got work again. Lord Danzo has reinstated the Association Corps to their wartime levels, which means more assignments for the Black Ops that unit Genma and Radu and the others are in, and fewer desk jobs and guard shifts, and overall less boredom for Genma. Less boredom is good. On the other, everything is fucked and Genma kinda hates it. There is a permeating sense of unease and distrust that has taken hold of the village since Sound's attack. Team 7's defection is an open secret at this point. It hadn't taken long for word to leak that the Kopinen Kakashi and Sasuke Uchiha and the Kyuubi hierarchy had gone rogue. The sense of vague panic that information has sown in Konoha's ranks is widespread, to say the least, and the whispers against the team are absolutely brutal. People are calling for Kakashi's head on a stick, and, while Genma understands the impulse, he actually finds himself somewhat annoyed by all of it. He knows that Team 7 is a threat, and that their defection is a betrayal of the highest order, but the fact that everyone seems more stressed about them than the fact that Otagakuer and Orochimaru attacked Konoha and killed Sarutobi and got away with it feels like insanity to him. A whole village and its batshit insane Otokage trying to destroy them feels like a much bigger fish to fry in his book. But what does he know about it, he thinks, bitterly taking another swallow of the sweet wine. He was only on a first-name basis with 2 Hokage and there when Sarutobi died on the end of Orochimaru's sword and, oh yeah, survived the front lines of the Third Shinobi War for half a decade. Village politics are well above his head, clearly. Genma snorts into his cup. He is dearly looking forward to getting absolutely fucking smashed tonight. He's going to either pick a fight or drag someone pretty into the bathroom and back and screw the ever-living daylights out of them. Hopefully it'll mean a break from the stress of these last few weeks, no matter which way the dice fall. If Rada doesn't stop him, that is. Curse his stupid best friend and his stupid mothering instincts. Genma is broken out of his whining thoughts as someone drops into the corner booth he's sequestered for the night. The Takubitsu Jonin sends a tired but genuine smile at Irika. The schoolteacher is one of his oldest friends and Genma would take a kunao to the throat for him. And recently, Genma thinks, things have been looking kind of like he might have to, considering the mess Irika had been in since the exams. Ibiki and the snakes at interrogation finally decide you are in the clear. He asks blithely. I think I take offense to that. Says Anko, who is of the aforementioned interrogation snakes, if at least one that's in their corner. She plops gracelessly into the seat next to Irika and forces him to scoot further in to make room for her as she grins meanly at Genma. It looks accidental, the way she's maneuvered Irika into the corner, but Genma knows it isn't. He would have done the same considering the absolute shit time the school teacher has had the past few weeks, shinobi protective instincts and all that. More than just starting the fall of dominoes that killed the third, or betraying his promise to the village, if anything makes Genma wanna kill Kakashi for what he's done, it's the position his defection has put Irika in. The teacher's been through hell these past couple weeks. Considering that he was registered as Naruto's immediate guardian and worse, had known semi-regular interactions with Kakashi and the rest of Team 7 in the month before they left. He's been cast under extreme suspicion. It's only thanks to Anko's intervention and Ibiki's own fondness for him that the Chunin hasn't been sent to the deepest darkest pits of IT to have his mind pulled apart. While the village has a long-standing policy of not using the Yamanaka's mind-reading techniques on loyal citizens, the loss of a Jinchuriki key tends to put such values under strain. Genma is unspeakably grateful for Ibiki and Anko in this regard. The Yamanaka's jutsu is not unknown to cause permanent damage to a shinobi's psyche after all. Even without the mindfucking though, Genma knows his friend has been raked over the coals in interrogation after interrogation since 7 defected. Iroquus suffered through half a dozen sessions with Ibiki himself, as well as other high-ranking interrogators, and those are only the ones Genma knows about. On top of that, the already stressed Chunin has been voluntarily picking up extra shifts at the mission desk, even agreeing to take on sorting and cataloging outgoing missions. Iroquois was already a workaholic even by ninja standards, and now he's spending nearly 20 additional hours at the mission desk on top of what he had already been working. According to Radu, when he'd cornered Iroquois about the choice, the schoolteacher had puffed up indignantly, like a pissed-off cat, and berated Radu for questioning his attempts to help the village in its time of need. The Tokabutsu Jonin had left the interaction so thoroughly scolded that no one had dared question Iroquois' work hours since. Genma may be changing that tonight considering how exhausted the Chunin across from him looks though. Iroquois' normally neat brown hair is piled in a bun that looks more like a knot than an intentional fashion choice, and his normally bright hazel eyes are almost glazed with stress and sleeplessness. He appears to be wearing the same clothes that Genma saw him in yesterday, so he has a sneaking suspicion that the Chunin hasn't slept in at least 48 hours. Anko and Genma share a speaking look as Iroquois slumps and drops his head into his arms. Answering his question from before, Iroquois mumbles from where his head is pressed against the dark wooden tabletop. I think so. I thought that about the last 2 times they've called me in though, so who knows at this point. Are you gonna tell Genma what you told me while I was dragging you from that goddamned mission desk you've chained yourself to? Anko's voice always sounds one part angry, one part smug, but Genma isn't used to hearing the worry that now laces through it as well. Genma turns expectantly to Iroquois, who in turn is glaring pointedly at Anko. The glare is significantly less impactful than it normally would be. Despite his height and sweet nature, Iroquois has a well-known temper and the lungs to make good on it. Genma has seen the Chunin make more than one jonin cry with his tirades against their shoddy work on missions reports or mistreatment of their comrades. Their group of friends has developed something of a strategy for the schoolteacher's fearsome temper, which usually amounted to avoid when possible, appease when necessary, flee if able. Now however, with his messy hair and slumped posture, Genma's friend looks less threatening than a wet kitten. Iroquois, he prompts as gently as his nature allows, and the exhausted man across from him folds almost immediately. It's not even serious. Anko shuts that shit down without hesitation, one arm going around Iroquois' drooping shoulders as she leans down to stare pointedly at him. She doesn't even have to say anything before Iroquois sighs in defeat, which, considering how fucking stubborn their friend is, sends Genma's adrenaline spiking before Iroquois even explains what's going on. Someone graffitied my house. That's not quite as dire as Genma was expecting by Anko's reaction. He knows the teacher has had rowdy students target his little apartment before, Naruto included, so he doesn't really see why Anko is so. That's an understatement. The dark-haired Kunoichi sounds, well, mad is always a given with her, but the worry is even more pronounced now. She turns to Genma and continues. Someone fucking spray-painted Die Trader across his entire front door. Anko really Iroquois starts, sounding frustrated and a little embarrassed. The poisoner slaps a hand over his mouth. Worse, his barrier seals were tampered with and someone clearly tried to disarm the traps on his front door. As she finishes, Anko drops her hand away from Iroquois' mouth as Genma stares in dismay at his friend. The other immediately melts further into his seat. He still looks embarrassed of all things. Really, Genma, Anko, it's fine. I'm sure it was a prank, and anyway I can take care of myself, you know. Genma isn't listening to Iroquois anymore. He knows he still looks like he is from any outside perspective, with his muscles relaxed and posture leaning against the padded back of the booth. His face just happens to be conveniently shadowed by the placement of the bar's warm but dim lighting and his hands out of sight under the table. In reality though, Genma couldn't be less relaxed. His mind has switched tracks entirely from thoughts of a fun evening to the full-blown attentiveness of a shinobi in enemy territory. His gray eyes drift through the room, cataloging expressions, stances, gazes directed their way, and the nearness of hands to weapons, with the perfected precision that's earned him his place as one of the most deadly assassins in the Leaf. Off-duty isn't crowded tonight compared to how it sometimes can get, but it's still got plenty of bodies in it. Plenty of potential threats. He finds several such threats almost immediately. No one is acting outright hostile of course, but a pair of chunin with the barrier core keeps sending glances towards their table, and a jonin that Genma only knows in passing is leaning on the nearby bar with a glass of sake in one hand and a kunao flipping steadily in the other. The jonin's eyes are making far too frequent detours to one exhausted chunin, and they're not the interested, appreciative detours that, until recently, would have Genma shoving Irika in the man's direction either. Those three aren't the only ones either. In total, Genma counts 7 Konoha ninja who keep sending looks toward Irika that are significantly more interested and significantly less friendly than acceptable. The chunin in question is still arguing doggedly with Anko, trying to convey that really, everything is fine and their worry over his safety is unfounded. He hasn't picked up on his audience or the protective tension that is coiling through Genma's muscles, further proof of how tired Irika is. However, Reita notices the latter as soon as he steps through the front door and begins making his way towards their table. The tall man catches Genma's eye and seeing something in his best friend's gaze immediately goes on guard. It isn't obvious to anyone, but Genma knows Reita better than himself most days, so he recognizes his tells. The way the tall man's steps lighten almost imperceptibly and the way he shifts slightly to make his sword, Kokyuto, more easily accessible is as clear as a shout to Genma that Reita knows something is up. Genma flicks his eyes, clearly and pointedly, to the people he's noticed in the room and then as casually as he can, lifts a senbon from his belt and into his mouth. Reita sits down at the table, sending a carefully arched brow Genma's way before warmly interrupting the rapidly deteriorating argument between Anko and Irika. Irika. You look a little exhausted, you doing okay? Irika, for lack of a better term, loses it. The schoolteacher throws his hands up and explodes. That's because I am exhausted, okay? His cheeks are flushed and tears actually seem to be gathering at the corners of his eyes. Naruto is gone and so are 2 of my other students, and I'm so worried about all them but also so mad and I just don't know what to do with myself most days. The mission desk is a mess and I know people are talking behind my back, and now I have to scrub spray paint off my front door and also rework my traps, and I have a test on chakra natures to grade still for my students and a week's worth of lesson plans to prepare. Anko pats Irika's back soothingly as the man thunks his head back down onto the tabletop with a distressed moan, and Reita makes some appropriately sympathetic comment or other. Genma isn't listening again because he's busy tracking the gazes of the ninja he's noticed, watching their scowls deepen at the chunin's outburst and a few, the jonin at the bar included, tightening hands on the hilts of weapons. He makes note of each of them in the unapologetic way that he does for anyone that may die from an unfortunate case of senbon through the jugular. Because these motherfuckers will die if they try to come after one of his friends. Genma may be reckless and irreverent and oppositional, but above all that he is loyal. Unflinchingly, unapologetically loyal. That loyalty belongs to the village for sure. He believes in the Leaf and would die for it if he was called to do so. But his loyalty to his friends supersedes even that. There aren't many people he counts in his inner circle. Anko, Reita, and his girlfriend Chizu, Izumo and Kotetsu, Guy, and of course Irika. There are other people he cares about, of course. He has dozens of friends and even more friendly acquaintances. He is likable, okay? But his loyalties are hard-earned and absolute and not widely given, and so if one of these fucking bastards tries to come after Irika. The metal between his teeth creaks slightly as he bears down on it, his fine-tuned control faltering for a moment. Reita gives him a pointed look and Anko kicks him less than gently under the table. Genma sends a barely there glare her way in response and then has to immediately hide a smile as a tiny black snake peeks out from Anko's dark hair to flick its tongue menacingly at him. If the kunoichi has her summons on her right now, then she's also noticed the less than friendly audience and is just as murderous about it. Reita makes a small sound that could pass as a yawn and crosses his arms. When Genma and Anko's eyes dart to him, he swiftly makes the umbu sign for hold against his arm where his form will hide it from the prying eyes of the other ninja in the bar. He's right, He always is, which is why Radu is their command when their team is in the field, but Genma is itching with nerves and he knows Anko isn't much better from the way her nails tap 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 quietly against the tabletop. Irika, even less perceptive than normal and entirely missing the silent conversation happening between his three dangerous friends, raises his head from the table to rub a slightly shaking hand over his bleary eyes. Honestly guys, things are tough but there isn't really anything I can do about it right now. Umbu is too busy to look into something as minor as a little bullying of a Chunin-level schoolteacher, and besides Ibiki and Lord Danzo have as good as cleared me. I don't see how worrying about it will help anything. It'll all blow over soon. Genma flicks his eyes to Radu again, and the scarred man rapidly shifts the sign he's still hiding in the crook of his arm. Genma catches compromised and then, move to safe house, and immediately knows what his friend is saying. Finally noticing the lull in responses, Irika drops his hands from his eyes to glance suspiciously around at them. He's about to open his mouth, likely to demand they tell him what they are scheming because it's not the first time he's caught them using Umbu sign to talk silently around him, when Genma cuts him off. Well, he exclaims, voice warm and unhurried, until you get things sorted at your place you can crash with me. Irika sputters. Genma honestly that's completely unnecessary and besides I don't want to impose and dash. Nonsense Ruka. I'd love to have you and anyway I've got a spare room that's been sitting empty since Rai decided he loves Chizu more than me. Rada laughs and Irika is still trying to argue, but Anko leans across the table to snark. That's cause Chizu can actually cook something other than charcoal Genma. Turning to Irika she pushes on. Did you know this motherfucker told me he hasn't eaten anything other than field rations this entire week? Cause he's too lazy to go buy groceries to properly feed himself. Clever Anko, Genma thinks even as he feigns a guilty sputter, using Irika's deep-seated need to take care of the people precious to him since he won't take care of himself. If it works then Genma is going to owe her a drink. Possibly several rounds. Irika's protests die as he turns fatigued but still indignant eyes toward Genma. Field rations Genma. You know the nutritional composition of those won't sustain you for long periods of time. Genma holds up his hands placatingly as Irika launches into a slightly delirious-sounding but still very well-informed lecture on the dietary requirements of active ninja. See Irika, adds Radu, smiling his calm and honest smile at their Chunin, you'd really be doing us a favor by staying with him for a bit. Otherwise I'm fully convinced the idiot is going to give himself scurvy and get us all killed on our next mission cause he falls out of a tree or something. Anko howls in laughter at this and Genma parodies an exaggerated feint of embarrassment. Irika is smiling at their antics. Genma is glad to see some of the brightness return to his friend's face. Fine, Irika says after the laughter has died down some, but only for a few days and only until I've stocked your fridge with some green things. If it'll make you feel better, sensei. Genma grins around the senbon still in his teeth. Irika's smile softens and he looks around the table at the three of them with so much bare gratefulness and affection. Thank you all, honestly, I don't know what I'd do without you. Well, you never have to worry about finding out, sensei, Rada says gently and Genma knows that his friend means it. Anko nods and tightens the arm she still has wrapped securely around the tired Chunin's shoulder as she launches into some embarrassing story or other, probably about him. Radu is smiling openly and warmly at the Chunin. They are both honest gestures, but Genma knows that they aren't uncalculated. Looking across the room the assassin makes eye contact with the Jonin at the bar again. He smiles at the other ninja, even sharper than the senbon still trapped between his teeth. It's not a nice smile. It's a smile that says, see that he has allies, see that he is protected and off limits. See that if you try to hurt what's ours we'll break you. The other man frowns and then turns away. Genma turns back towards his people. He knows that in some ways Irika is right. Things will calm down after people have had a chance to get over being afraid and angry about Team 7 and Otagakeru and the third's death. But until then, Genma and Anko and Radu and Katetsu and Izumo too once they loop the couple in, will watch the school teacher's back. And if anyone tries to sink a kunao into it? Well let's just say that Genma will gladly show them that Kakashi Hatake wasn't the only ninja to be feared in the leaf. Chapter 17, It's You and Me. Kakashi waits an entire month before sitting down to write his first update to Irika. Mostly, he's waiting to make sure that no one is close enough on their trail that a letter would alert them to Team 7's presence. But more than that, he keeps waiting for something to go wrong. He's not complaining that it hasn't yet, but as he finally sits down in the makeshift living room they've cobbled together and begins putting pen to paper, he almost feels a little foolish writing down how strangely uneventful the past 30 days have been for Team 7. Unlike the month before they left Konoha, when every week saw a new crisis emerge and Kakashi could feel his lifespan shrinking, their time in the archives so far has passed easily, smoothly. Kakashi keeps expecting the other shoe to drop, for Konoha to find them or Naruto to have another fainting spell or some terrible, new secret to reveal itself, but nothing of that nature has happened over the past month at all. Instead, Team 7 took the time to rest and recuperate and establish themselves in the caves. When Kakashi had suggested they try and find the archives, he hadn't expected anything more than a few dusty rooms with some long unread scrolls cluttering them. The archives weren't ever supposed to be anything more than a temporary resting point before Team 7 continued moving, continued running. But after a few initial days of exploration, the Uzushio archives turned out to be far more than that. Instead of the decrepit storage facility Kakashi had expected, it seemed the cave system had once housed one of Uzushio's libraries. Kakashi knew they'd had other places of learning in the village while it still functioned, both for sealing and civilian pursuits alike, but the mountain archives appeared to have served another function completely. In Team 7's first forays into the tunnels, they'd quickly come to realize that the archives were actually an entire network of caves specifically built for studying and practicing fuinjutsu. Near the front entrance of the archives there was the spacious sealing chamber for laying large, complex seals, and another large room near it with scarred and worn training dummies and empty weapons racks on the wall. Beyond that rested a small kitchenette with a broken refrigerator and a coal-burning stove, a bathroom with a simple shower and pipes that rattled but still produced hot water given the time, and a room that held a few cots with moth-eaten mattresses. Continuing deeper into the mountain there were so many branching tunnels with off-shooting rooms full of scroll and book-stacked shelves that they still haven't even begun to explore all of them. With careful use of the Sharingan, Sakura's keen eyes, and Kurama's patchy memories, they'd also managed to find a couple of well-hidden passages to the surface of the mountain above. The knowledge of escape routes has made the claustrophobia that still prickles at Kakashi's peace a little easier to manage. He's come to peace with the fact that if he is a rat in a cage, at least it's a big cage, with more than one way in and out. Considering their findings, Team 7's collective best estimation is that the archives had once been used to house and train Uzushio's population of seal masters while they were working on various projects. A lucky break for the homeless, rogue ninjas who'd stumbled upon them, to put it lightly. Of course, a lot of what had once been kept in the archives had been cleared out, and according to Kurama, anything truly sensitive had been stored in the Uzukage's office anyway. The archives had large blank spots where once there must have been impressive collections of weapons and sealing scrolls. Kakashi wonders if the latter were destroyed on purpose to avoid the chance of them falling into enemy hands. Probably a smart move on the part of the long-dead Uzushio nin, but certainly no favor to them now. Still, no point in looking for a gift-hidden base of operations in its lack of weaponized scrolling information. Even if they still haven't managed to explore its entire expanse, they'd adapted the archives to fit their needs well enough for now. Unlike what Kakashi had been preparing Team 7 for in Konoha, they'd had no need to go scrambling off into the wilderness, bouncing from backwater town to backwater town. No one else ever knew the archives were here, and even if they did, they couldn't get in the front door without Uzumaki blood. Team 7 was safe. Once Kakashi realized that they won't need to leave the archives, there was a rather lengthy list of things that Team 7 had to accomplish in order to truly settle into their new mountain home. They needed to lay traps for fish in the small freshwater streams that trickled down the eastward side of the mountain and snares for the light-footed game that traversed its sparse woodlands. They needed to don disguises and go into the nearby village to purchase the essentials that they couldn't otherwise obtain. Most pressingly though, they needed to bury Uzushio's dead. It was not an easy task. There were a lot of remains scattered through the quiet, shattered city and no way to identify them. The only one among them with any true ties to the village was Naruto, so when he decided to create a funeral pyre and burn the nameless skeletons all at once, they respectfully followed his lead. I don't even know which of them would have been my family members, he told Kakashi at one point, eyes full of directionless fury and loss. Kakashi, wisely, said nothing to this, simply dropped an arm around Naruto's shoulders and let the last Uzumaki bury his face into Kakashi's side and shake through the sobs. Sakura and Sasuke approached the task with suitable gravity and solemnity. Kurama stayed quiet. They spent 5 days working tirelessly to find and give rest to all of Uzushio's people. Even between the 4 of them and all of Kakashi's Ninken, there was a lot of city to cover, and a lot of devastation to sift through. Several times they found remains that bore the trappings of shinobi from Mist or Kumo. When they uncovered the first such skeleton, Sakura asked Naruto what he wanted to do with the ninja that had died destroying Whirlpool. Instead of answering, the Jinchuriki picked up the partly shattered skull and crushed it to a dust which blew from his trembling hand to mingle with the island's constant salt-laden breeze. Naruto hadn't said a word as he dumped the skeleton on the ground, stalking away. They let him go. His answer was clear enough, and after that, they had irreverently disposed of any others they found bearing the marks of the villages who had destroyed Uzushio. It was undoubtedly one of the hardest things Kakashi has ever had to do, and not only because he had to watch the toll it took on his kids. So much of his life has gone to hardening his heart, but even he had to close his eyes and breathe through the sharp feeling of loss when he and Sakura uncovered the small, crushed bones under the roof of what was once the academy building. They got it done eventually, and once they did, once all of Uzushio's restless ghosts had been given peace, the village hidden in the whirlpools began to feel a bit less like a graveyard and more like something that could become home. When they realized they wouldn't have to run again, that whirlpool was going to be where they stayed to put down roots, for the time being, the kids had jumped on the chance to make the place their own. The former Konoha Inn quickly turned the once ceiling chamber at the entrance into a living room of sorts. Ugly but soft gray couches bought on the cheap from the nearby fishing village, Gyosan, are set atop a massive woven rug that covers the ink-stained stone floor. A handful of ratty blankets and mismatched pillows clutter the couches, and most of the original bookshelves have been filled with scrolls and knickknacks found either in the archives themselves or the rest of Uzushio's ruins. Using some of the additional, smaller albeit, but still impressive caverns nearby, the entrance, Team 7 has made for themselves 4 bedrooms. They also cleaned and stocked the little kitchen and adapted the small bathroom to serving 4 people to the best of their abilities. With all of the decades-old dust cleared out and purpose once again given to its chambers, a somewhat homely atmosphere has begun to take shape in the Uzushio archives. Of course, it's homely in the way that has Kunao hidden in every room, spare straw for the training dummies always well stocked, escape routes carefully mapped, and soldier pills next to the salt shaker in the kitchen. Ninja homely. Despite all of them having their own space, Kakashi finds to his amusement that his kids rarely use their bedrooms for more than storage. All 3 of them have taken to staying up later than is probably reasonable, piled together in various tangles of limbs and pillows and blankets in what they've grown to call the den. He joins them sometimes, telling the more light-hearted stories from his time as Hound on some nights, and on others just listening to the kids chatter. On evenings when Naruto and Sasuke seem particularly grounded and unhaunted, he recounts tales of Itaki and Shishu, of Minato and Kushina, even of his old team. It's like pressing on a bruise for all 3 of them, painful, but a reminder that they are healing the best they can. Even though they may not hurt her in the same way they do the rest of her team, Sakura always listens earnestly to these stories. She wraps strong arms that much more securely around Naruto or presses that much closer against Sasuke's side. In a village setting, Kakashi would be worried about the developing dependency Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke have on each other and on him. He would worry that their loyalties to each other had come to supersede their loyalties to the village. But now, the only thing they have to depend on or be loyal to is each other, so he doesn't find he minds the pup's sleeping arrangement or growing bonds. Besides, lucky for him, it makes it easier to check on them in the night when his anxieties and nightmares haunt the cruelest. Kakashi considers himself lucky for a lot of reasons. Naruto's seal seems to have stabilized somewhat since arriving in Whirlpool. It's not better and the boy still feels discomfort from it fairly regularly, but it's not deteriorating at the same rate it was either. He can't help but wonder if the Jinchuriki is more at peace or if something else is holding the 8 trigrams disintegration at bay. Either way, it gives them some time to find a solution. Seal worries aside, Naruto has proven extremely adept at settling into their new home. After a solid first week of doing nothing more daring than sneaking out to hunt and retrieve water, the team had finally come to trust that they had made it this far without pursuit and had trekked the 10 miles or so to nearby Gyosan to get supplies. They had hunged of course, but even wearing a face not his own, Naruto had proven particularly capable at bartering. He'd managed to score them a set of mismatched plates and bowls as well as the pillows and blankets that now sat in their living room, all in exchange for helping one of the old women in town clean out her attic. When asked about it, the blonde had explained that he used to have to do all kinds of creative bartering to afford school supplies with the stipends Konoha gave him as an orphan. After learning that particular tidbit about his teammate's checkered childhood, Sasuke had disappeared to the training room and hadn't come back out until several hours and several absolutely shredded cloth dummies later. Sakura has also been adjusting well. The seals that frequent the ruins of Uzushio as well as those scrolls they can find discussing Fuinjutsu have captured her attention like Kakashi has seen little else do. When he doesn't have them training or helping keep the archive clean and livable, she can be found curled on one of the den couches, a myriad of scrolls piled around her as she meticulously works her way through them one at a time, carefully taking notes as she goes. She's not going to be running out of material anytime soon either. Every time they explore further into the caves they find new rooms full of carefully sorted, dusty scrolls and books. From Sakura's extensive readings it seems that the information left undestroyed when Uzushio fell is mostly non-combat related. Despite this, there seems to be a nearly never-ending amount of content available. Unlike the other great ninja villages, Uzushio had used sealing for everything, so Kakashi supposes that it makes sense that they have such a completely overwhelming amount of info on it. Sakura has been plowing through manuscripts on everything from construction seals used to decrease the noise levels of construction in populated areas to seals acted to more securely anchor ships in the rough Uzushio harbor to seals that functioned almost like a minor soldier pill, allowing doctors and desk ninja and patrols to work late hours and stay energized. His pink-haired student has tried to explain her readings to him several times, and try as he might, those interactions usually just end with Kakashi wanting to flee. Her fluency in the complicated science has rapidly surpassed Kakashi's shaky grasp on the subject. The girl has been taking to sealing like a tigress to a particularly slow and sickly deer. Lately when she jogs up to Kakashi with a new pile of scrolls in her arms and that look in her eyes, Kakashi feels like maybe he's the deer. Despite his inability to really help her, over the past week Sakura has even started carefully drawing out her own seals. She started simple with smoke bomb tags, but when they tested them, the seals had worked perfectly. Sakura's whoop of joy at the pillar of black smoke that poured out of the piece of paper had been one of those things that makes Kakashi feel like every bit of pain that has brought them here was worth it. More than once Kakashi has stumbled upon her working furiously in one of her notebooks with the sketches she made weeks ago of the still mysterious seals down by the harbor open in front of her alongside books, bafflingly, on physics and medical ninjutsu. Kakashi should ask questions probably, but she doesn't seem to want help, and honestly, at this point, he'd probably just slow down whatever she's working on. More than anything else so far, it makes him miss Irika. Kakashi is certain that the school teacher would know how to support Sakura in her passions. The best Kakashi can offer her is trusting her brilliance and drive, and also somewhat panickedly asking Irika for advice, any advice at all, in his letter. He will not write that he misses him though. Kakashi feels similarly out of his depth when it comes to Sasuke. Whereas Sakura has wrapped herself up in Fuinjutsu, Sasuke seems to have leaned into his quiet interest in medical ninjutsu. During their second week in the archives, Kakashi and the kids found a room stock full of records, old training books, and medical dummies from the long-destroyed Uzushio hospital. Sasuke had moved the stacks of books to his room immediately, and though he isn't tearing through them at near the rate Sakura is with her Fuinjutsu, he's still certainly been setting time aside each day to practice the new field. Kakashi knows even less about medical jutsu than he does about Fuinjutsu. If push comes to shove he can slow down serious bleeding, but that's about it. So on one hand, he has no idea how to go about teaching Sasuke, but on the other thank the gods that at least one of his kids is interested in healing. He has a feeling that they'll probably need it sooner than later. When he'd asked about Sasuke's interest in the subject, the dark-haired boy had simply shrugged and said quietly and a little bitterly, "I won't lose anyone else precious to me." Kakashi couldn't argue with that logic, though he is still worried that Sasuke's drive may not be coming from the best place. Thankfully, Naruto's interest seems to be steering towards a bastard combination of taijutsu and ninjutsu, both of which Kakashi is more than able to instruct. Without the Hokage ban on his knowledge of copied jutsu in place anymore, Kakashi truly has what feels like an infinite source of things to teach the Jinchuriki. Given a few years for him to impart all he knows, the boy is going to be an absolute terror. All three of his kids will be. One of the strangest developments of their stay in the archives is the ongoing presence of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Not unlike Kakashi, the tailed beast seems determined to actually help the once genin of Team 7. Kakashi has walked in more than once to hear the fox's deep rumble explaining something to one of the kids. Naruto, unsurprisingly, seems to receive most of Kurama's attention. Kakashi's student has made reference to help with everything from meditation to his katas, but he isn't the only one receiving tutelage. Only last week Kakashi had walked in to overhear the Kyuubi's rumbling explanation of a particular aspect of ceiling theory that seemed to be stumping Sakura. A few days before, Sasuke mentioned the fox teaching him a seven throwing stance that was unique to Uzushio. It's strange. Kakashi still doesn't trust the fox. He doesn't even like the creature. However, he has come to believe that maybe, it isn't completely selfish in its motivations. His motivations. Because that's the other thing, despite Kakashi's own haunting, terrifying memories of a dark sky full of fire and the mindless roar of a creature bent solely on the destruction of everything in its path, he cannot argue anymore that Kurama is nothing more than a monster. The Kyuubi is inarguably monstrous and dangerous and otherworldly and uncaring about humans in the grand scheme of things, that much is still certain in Kakashi's mind. But, he's also more than that. 3 nights ago Kakashi had crept into the den to check on his kids. It was one of those nights where even after he jerked awake in bed, the phantom stickiness of blood still felt like it clung to his hands, still coated his right arm. So with Obito's Sharingan burning in its socket and his recent nightmare still crawling fresh beneath the surface of his skin, he'd gone to check on his kids. When he'd poked his head into the dimly lit living area, he'd found all 3 pups curled among a pile of pillows and blankets on the floor. Some of the kids' nest had clearly been pilfered from Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura's respective rooms. The 3 of them were dogpiled together in its middle as the low light of the lamps cast a dim, warm glow in the space. The only sounds were the quiet sleeping breaths of Sakura and Sasuke, heads resting on Naruto's shoulders, and the rumbling gently echoing murmur of the Kyuubi's voice. The fox's presence in the space had sent Kakashi's hackles rising instantly. His already restless mind ratcheted up in stress at the presence of the beast among his vulnerable team. But shock rapidly replaced his protectiveness as he stood and listened from the shadows of the cracked doorway. From what Kakashi could make out, the Kyuubi no Kitsune, demon, being of disaster and calamity, seemed to be telling them a bedtime story. Kakashi had silently stood listening for several minutes, and once his heart rate and adrenaline had settled, had crept back to the dark of his room. Kakashi still doesn't know if Kurama realizes he overheard or not. His eyes had certainly never raised to meet Kakashi's and his tone never changed. More than even the strangeness of the Kyuubi telling a bedtime story, Kakashi finds himself stuck even now on how easily his sleep found him after that and how nightmare-free it was. It's as if the knowledge of the fox watching over his kids had been comfort enough that Kakashi's subconscious allowed him to truly feel safe. As if the fox, the Kyuubi, was considered safe. It's certainly one of the oddest things in the life he now finds himself living, especially considering that only a few months ago he was certain that Kurama would as soon bite out their throats as look at them. All of this goes in the letter. The silver-haired Jonin huffs a self-deprecating laugh at himself as he lifts the pen from the parchment. He's managed to fill several pages already and he does feel a little ridiculous about it. He's still happy to be writing the letter though. He loves his kids, but after weeks on the road and then being stuck together in the archives, he desperately wants the chance to speak to another adult. Even if just through kanji. Especially if that adult is Iruka. Naruto, Sasuke, and Kakashi are, at the moment, relaxing in the common room after dinner. It's been a quiet day with a morning spent checking some of the traps they'd lain to ensure a steady supply of fresh meats and then sparring as a team in the afternoon, but otherwise not else of note. Naruto is now leaning back against Sasuke's legs as he chatters about his latest trip into Gyosan while the other boy hums at appropriate junctures to show he's listening. Sakura is missing from their little cluster in the den. She's spent the afternoon digging through a new cluttered room of scrolls and books they uncovered yesterday. Looking back at the pages he's written, Kakashi worries briefly that Iruka will be annoyed by all his rambling and superfluous details about the lives he and the kids are building for themselves in the archives. Then he remembers the schoolteacher's gentle smile as Naruto talked a mile a minute at him about his day, or his thoughtful attentiveness as Sakura worked through a logic puzzle while they sat in the Haytake kitchen. Iruka is an incredibly genuinely good listener, and he probably wants to hear all the nonsense that Kakashi finds himself writing down, maybe almost as much as Kakashi wants to share it with him. Even more pressing than his disquiet over the rambling nature of the letter, Kakashi is concerned that it looks a little like Team 7 has been slacking. After all, at the moment, they don't have any real plan for what their next steps will bring, let alone how to begin repairing Naruto's seal. It's not to say they haven't been keeping busy, but he doesn't feel like they're made any progress either. Kakashi knows Iruka wouldn't fault them, or him specifically, for their hesitancy and for their lack of a definite plan, but it still makes him frown down at the pages in front of him. As Kakashi is deciding how to begin wrapping up his letter, his sharp ears catch the sound of running footsteps. He would be worried, but the steps, while rushed, are loud. No ninja moves noisily when there is danger, so Kakashi is more curious than worried when Sakura comes barreling into the room. Her pink hair, longer now, is escaping its messy twist to stick to her cheeks. Her eyes are bright and a grin splits her face. In her hands, clutched close to her chest, is a small stack of old-looking leather-bound books. Naruto and Sasuke, also having heard their teammates approach, have paused their conversation to stare with slightly confused interest at her. Finally catching her breath from what must have been a dead sprint from the room she was going through, Sakura exclaims, "I found Mito Uzumaki's journals." Chapter 18, Behind Every Open Door. I found Mito Uzumaki's journals. It takes Kakashi a moment to place the name, and Sasuke just looks confused, but Naruto sits bolt upright, eyes going wide instantly. "You did?" His voice is loud in the quiet atmosphere that had filled the space. Sakura nods rapidly and drops onto the carpeted ground in front of Naruto and Sasuke. She carefully, almost reverently, sets the stack of books on the ground. Now that they aren't hidden in Sakura's arms, Kakashi can see that the journals are old. That tracks if Sakura's right about who wrote them. Now that he remembers where he's heard that name before, Kakashi can't help but sit forward with curiosity as Naruto picks up and begins thumbing through one of the memoirs of the first Jinchuriki. "Are you sure they are actually Mito's?" asks Kakashi after a few moments. Sakura blows some of the hair that's escaped from its bun out of her face. "I'm not sure, honestly. It's signed with her name, but..." Sasuke, who is peering over Naruto's shoulder at the journal, interrupts, "It's complete nonsense." "What?" Sakura crowds in, bumping her head against Naruto's, trying to see so she can read too. "It may be in a strange dialect, but it can't be." She peters off into silence, her pink brows dipping together in confusion as she tries to parse through the jumbled kanji before them. Interest piqued, Kakashi reaches between them and grabs one of the yet unopened journals. The leather spine creaks with age as he opens it, and the smell of dust and old ink reaches his nose. He looks over the first several lines of text and can immediately see what Sasuke means. Not only do the sentences not make any sense, but there aren't even clear paragraphs. The words seem to be spread about the page in a random jumble with no clear orientation vertically or horizontally. It may be written with a cipher in mind. Sakura offers hesitantly, then apologetically, "I'm sorry, I should have actually looked at them before I came running, I just thought dash." No, that's Naruto, red eyes flicking over the text rapidly, "I think I know how to read this." "You do?" Naruto nods, head tilting thoughtfully. Kakashi has come to realize over the past several weeks that it's a gesture the boy tends to use right before saying something that once again reminds Kakashi that Team 7 has more than just Sasuke and Sakura as geniuses among its ranks. "Sure." Naruto's voice goes from considerate to bright as he turns a comforting smile to Sakura. "Look, the words are organized in a spiral, just like the Uzumaki crest, so if we just..." One tan finger traces to the center of the page before tapping on a nearly unnoticeable dot of ink. "Here. Start here and then read counterclockwise." Sakura snatches the journal and follows the path Naruto has pointed out with her eyes. Now that he's looking specifically for it, Kakashi can see the pattern too, the way the kanji wraps to the center of the page like one of the whirlpools that Uzushio was named after all those decades ago. "In this I am certain dash," Sakura begins, reading slowly aloud from the journal. "The Kyuubi is less beastly and more intelligent than we would have once guessed. Its nature is still elusive to me, but in the way that is based more on obfuscation than otherness. I can say with assuredness that the creature is intentionally obstructing my attempts to navigate the seal that now binds us together. Kurama's rumbling laugh interrupts Sakura's reading, and Kakashi looks up from watching her to see the now familiar grin of the fox taking up residence on Naruto's bright face. The difference between the two has grown even starker to Kakashi's keen perception over the recent months. Though they may speak from the same form, it is glaringly obvious the difference between Kurama and his Jinchuriki. Naruto's voice has always reminded Kakashi of a bubbling stream, rushing with thoughts more numerous and rapid than can quite be contained within the banks of his sharpened canines. His eyes are wide and expressive. His smiles are frequent and brilliant, and every emotion is as obvious as the crimson of his irises. Kurama is distinctly different. The voice alone is noticeably changed, more like claws on stone, with precise phrasing and sharp tones as opposed to his rambling host. Every feature on Naruto's face seems keener when Kurama is in control, eyes a deeper crimson, whisker marks more pronounced, and teeth even more pointed than usual. Maybe to someone less familiar the shift wouldn't be so obvious, but for Team 7 it's stark. Mito was a bitch, but she was a perceptive one, Kurama says around sharp teeth. So you had been making things difficult for her on purpose? Asks Sakura, raising one slightly judgmental brow. The fox scoffs out a laugh, a shade of some of the first genuine malice they've heard from him in more than a month, driving the edge of the sound. Of course I did. She and her bastard of a husband shoved me into a ramshackle seal of binding, and then on the good days treated me like a bug under a glass, and on the bad like a monster. She was certainly brilliant and had more effortless control and strength than any shinobi I've met since, but I would have happily broken every bone in her body between my teeth. Team 7 processes that, slowly. Kakashi would be amused by the way that Sasuke doesn't quite manage to suppress an audible gulp, and Sakura's curious eyes widen with alarm, but he's feeling the same disquiet. It's a hell of a reminder that the fox is no tame creature, no pet they've managed to bring to heel. He's certainly decided to tolerate Kakashi and his pups for some reason, but in the grand scheme of things, the creature that is bound to Naruto is as friendly as a wildfire and twice as devastating. Seemingly deciding that she'd rather avoid opening that can of worms further, Sakura thumbs through several pages of the journal, opening to a random section. She reads for a few moments, and as she does her eyebrows climb slightly in surprised, considerate silence. Kakashi knows that look. Sakura. The girl doesn't respond for several beats, still reading whatever text is before her. When she responds, it's directed to the Kyuubi, not her sensei. Kurama, did you know she was writing theories about you and your abilities in here? That seems to catch the fox by surprise. He leans forward as Sakura turns the journal toward him. Red eyes flicking quickly over the spiraling account. Kurama blinks, nearly looking surprised. Kakashi cannot stop himself from leaning to try and see what's on the page. He catches the words Shifuto and Kagami almost immediately. Sasuke, who is doing the exact same thing as him, Sherry-non spinning lazily as he digests the information of the page, asks, the Kyuubi is a shapeshifter. Well, specifically Mito seems to think that the Kyuubi Jinchuriki could have shapeshifting abilities, Sakura hedges. Kurama sits back on his heels, a contemplative look in his bright eyes. Kakashi gets the sense that if they could see the fox's tails they'd be whipping side to side in agitation. I do have shapeshifting abilities in my unsealed form. As a kitsune it is in my nature. Kurama sounds considerate and still a little baffled. I had no idea that Mito had theorized that specific ability could extend to one of my captors, though. I don't even remember her writing this. How? Sakura isn't quite smirking when she answers, but the light in her eyes is still just as challenging. Well, you said that you hid things from her awareness, who's to say she didn't do the same to you? Kurama looks completely flabbergasted, which is a hysterically strange expression for a being of such immeasurable power to wear. Naruto can shapeshift. Sasuke sounds incredulous. Kakashi really doesn't blame him. It would explain how he invented the Oryoke so young and with so little experience. Sakura is flipping through the pages again, the same nearly manic excitement with which she approaches Fuinjutsu growing on her face. He was subconsciously predisposed to the ability because of Kurama. His body knew changing shape was something he should be able to do, and so he found a way to do it even without formalized training. But he can already change his appearance with Oikyo, What's special about whatever thing Mito is writing about? Another fair inquiry on Sasuke's front as far as Kakashi is concerned. Because it's not just changing appearance. That's Kurama, still looking as close to shell-shocked as possible for an embodiment of calamity. A kitsune's shape changing is absolute, it's dash. One of Sakura's calloused pale hands slaps over Kurama's mouth as, grinning like a mad woman, she says, wait, don't spoil the surprise. Kakashi, staring in vague horror at Sakura's blatant and joyful disregard for the personal space and autonomy of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, starts, Sakura, maybe you should not dash. She cuts him off too. Kurama, give Naruto control back. 1 part annoyance, 1 part acceptance and 3 parts mischief, the fox obeys, the most powerful spirit in all the elemental nations bowing to the whims of his 13-year-old student. Kakashi really needs to find a strong drink. There is the familiar shift and it's suddenly Naruto blinking at them all. He gives a sheepish but excited smile. Alright, it's me now, what did you want me to try, Sakura? The girl in question is practically vibrating in her skin. Try turning into me right now. Naruto wrinkles his nose, I mean I've never really used the Warwick that way before dash. Trust me Naruto? Please. And there is a weight to that, a broader, deeper reaching question almost. Naruto doesn't hesitate further, only nods with a bright smile and an, okay, Sakura. And then he transforms with the puff of white smoke that Kakashi has watched many times before. Never before like this though, because as the smoke clears another Sakura is sitting in front of them. Kakashi has seen 1,000 clone jutsus over his life, some even near perfect. They never actually are perfect though, because a clone is, by definition, an imperfect reflection of the original. There is always something that gives it away. It's why things like scent wards and identification seals can work at all. Even hunging into someone doesn't allow a ninja to copy everything about them. Scent is only one such marker. Chakra nature, chakra density, and flow, yin or yang saturation, scars, mannerisms, patterns of speech and a dozen other things are all factors that go into making every individual shinobi, or civilian for that matter, unique. It's always been as good as a law of chakra, a universal constant for shinobi. Until now. Kakashi blinks. Stares. Stares a little harder. Uncovers his Sharingan and takes careful sniffs at the air. He pays close attention to the chakra signatures active in the room. It doesn't make a difference. If he didn't know for a fact that Sakura was sitting on his left and Naruto on his right, he would be completely unable to tell the original from the copy. Oh, I hate this so much, laments Sasuke, and Sakura, the real one, grins at the exact same moment, saying, this is the best thing ever. Kakashi feels like he may have to rewrite his letter to Iruka. Naruto blinks Sakura's pretty jade eyes at his team, and it's insane, because Kakashi's brain knows intellectually that's Naruto and not Sakura, but he'll be damned if even such a stereotypically Uzumaki expression doesn't perfectly transcribe via some aspect of whatever this ability is to one Sakura has worn many times. Why does this feel so different than my normal Warwick? The Jinchuriki asks, turning his arms over to inspect them and then tilting his head side to side, feeling the unfamiliar weight of nearly shoulder-length, pink hair. Sakura, the real one still, hops to her feet and, grabbing Naruto's hands, pulls her teammate to his feet. She swings them around the room with a bright laugh, and Kakashi and Sasuke watch the two pink heads with wide eyes, trying to keep straight who is who. Kakashi feels a little like he's back at the Rhine Festival with Team Minato, trying to guess under which shuffling cup was hidden the marble. Sakura, maybe the real one? He's not positive anymore, grins. Don't you all see what a big deal this is? Sasuke shakes his head blankly. There is a pronounced furrow of frustration between his brows as he looks between the two Sakura copies, and Kakashi would find more amusement in his struggle if he wasn't so baffled himself. Naruto, yes, that one has to be Naruto, he thinks, says, I mean, it's really cool Sakura, but I don't get why it's such a big deal honestly. Naruto, what are your chakra natures? The blonde, pinkette blinks at her in confusion at the suddenness of the inquiry. Kakashi suddenly understands what she may be getting at though, and his own eyes widen. Because if Naruto's chakra is indistinguishable from Sakura's with this ability, then wind and fire. Naruto offers. Mine, Sakura points at herself. Are earth and water, your polar opposites. Yeah, I knew that dash. Try and do an earth jutsu right now. Sakura, you know I'm shit at those, the chakra moves too slow and I've never gotten it right and dash. Naruto. Just try. Fine. The Jinchuriki throws his hands up in surrender and then brings them together to flash through several familiar signs. Doton, Rikyu. There is a rush of chakra and it's Sakura's chakra, but the girl in question is just standing there practically radiating smug excitement. Naruto perfectly executes the earth jutsu. The rumbling, vibrating earth is loud in the enclosed space of the archives, and for a second Kakashi has to quell the rising, panic-flavored memories of a long-ago cave-in and everything it wrought. It's a little easier than it may normally be because Naruto, yes, that one is still definitely maybe Naruto, is looking at his hands in shock and Sasuke is quietly whispering what the fuck and Sakura is leaping around in circles hooping like an excited child. I can do earth-style jutsu now. Naruto asks in bafflement. Sakura, scooping up Mito's journal and brandishing it like a weapon, grins. Not just earth-style. What if you turned into Sasuke? Or Kakashi-sensei? Or a cage? You can do any jutsu. Naruto is staring at her mouth hanging open and Sasuke, sounding like he's in physical pain, says, I feel like I need to lay down. Kakashi, however, is finally starting to catch up with Sakura, and by extension, Mito Uzumaki's, train of thought. He runs a considering hand along his jaw as he looks at the Sakura copy and asks, could he use clan techniques then? Bloodlines? Like the Sharingan. Sakura is pacing now. Her enthusiasm shines from her face and her hands flutter through the air as if she is sorting the ideas as they come to her. Kakashi has to suppress another memory of Obito working through puzzles in the same way, with the same nearly frenetic energy. Possibly, Sakura tells the room at large. I'd have to read more of what Mito-san wrote, and really it all depends on the structure of Naruto's seal and what kinds of chakra manipulation it will allow for. If I had to conjecture, I would guess that special techniques are outside his scope simply because of time limits and familiarity and such, but maybe with proper training and dash. Sakura. There is another puff of white smoke and regular, blonde, red-eyed Naruto is standing and smiling somewhat sheepishly at his rambling teammate. Sakura blinks at him, startled from her enthusiastic tirade. You're kinda freaking me out a little. Can we take this one step at a time? Sakura flushes immediately in embarrassment and sends him an apologetic grin. Yes, of course. Sorry I got carried away. Nah, that's fine, it's just a lot, you know? And honestly, shifting felt kinda funny and not in like a good way. Sasuke, who has either shaken off his bafflement or buried it deep down where he doesn't have to deal with it, a method that's success Kakashi himself can attest to, intones. It may not be a good idea to try again with the 8 trigrams so unstable at the moment. Sakura droops further and even Kakashi feels guilty this time. Somehow he'd forgotten about the state of the seal in the excitement of discovering Mito's journals. Naruto, seeing the way the excitement leaches out of his pink-haired teammate, offers thoughtfully, hey, maybe there will be answers in the journals for the seal too. Sakura perks back up immediately. Maybe. Kurama, what do you think? There's a pause as the fox shifts to take control again, tapping tan fingers thoughtfully against Naruto's chin as he considers the question. Mito wasn't a seal master by any stretch, but she was the student of several and, more importantly, she was directly involved with the creation of my first seal of binding. There's a chance she would have had ideas. And that's just what we need. Sakura is pacing again, the brightness back in her eyes. If I can read enough alternative sealing theories for containing a Baijuyu, specifically Yukarama, I may be able to more or less reverse engineer a seal that functions how we need it to. You could. Kakashi is really trying to keep the doubt out of his voice because he doesn't want her to think he's underestimating or undervaluing her, but Sakura, binding seals, especially ones that are made to contain Baijuyu, are insanely complicated. From what I remember hearing from Kushina, it took several seal masters to craft the seal that was put on her, and she and Minato and Jiraiya spent years building the theories that went into the 8 trigrams, and it still turned out incomplete. This isn't some academy exam or interesting puzzle you can overcome with just conviction and... He pauses, trying to find a gentler alternative and failing, bullheadedness. Sakura considers this, her heightened energy slowing and the mood in the den darkening. Finally, she asks, voice clear and composed, "Kurama, how long does the 8 trigrams have before it completely breaks down?" Kakashi's heart skips a beat. It's a question none of them have dared to speak aloud until now, and they should have because the answer is so critical to what they do moving forward, but there is quiet for several beats until Kurama's rumbling voice comes, 1 year. 1.5 at most. The words bounce against the stone walls, filling the space and echoing to strike again and again like blows. 1 year. 1 year for the 5 of them to somehow learn enough about Fuinjutsu and specifically the most secretive and challenging part of the study, to repair a seal that houses one of the most powerful spirits on the planet. None of them have to say what happens if they don't succeed. The memory of Naruto collapsed, pale and shaking, on the grass of the Hatake compound as his seal burned with the corrupted light of a dying star is fresh enough in all their minds. Kakashi feels fear, sharper and more poignant than he's felt since they came to Uzushio. What they need to do is impossible. With the resources and skills and manpower they have, there is no way he can see that they can swing it. Sakura may be interested in seals, but she has absolutely no formalized training and he certainly can't teach her. They'll need to get help, to go to one of the other elemental nations or possibly Orochimaru and beg for assistance or do something or Naruto will. Okay, says Sakura, interrupting his spiral. Kakashi's eyes flash to her, incredulous. There's no way she can think this is something that is in her realm of capabilities. He's never known Sakura to be prideful though, and his student's shoulders are relaxed, face turned partially away from him as she looks thoughtfully at Naruto. Mito's journal is in one of her hands, and the other is tucked in the pocket of her gray sweatpants. She looks calm, composed, and Kakashi is trying to tell if she's joking or if she doesn't understand how insurmountable this hurdle is. She turns to him and Kakashi feels his eyes widen in response. Kakashi has seen her determined before. That morning, now so long ago, in front of the Hatake compound, the light of dawn on her face and fire in her eyes, rises to the forefront of his thoughts. She had been determined then. But this is different. It's that same fire that he can see in her now, but it's sharpened, focused. This isn't pride, it isn't an underestimation of the problem, it isn't even determination. It is certainty. Kakashi can see in her face, as clear as he saw that sunrise so many mornings ago, that she will do this. He has to be sure though, because he will not gamble the life of one of his precious people, and so he quietly asks, "Sakura, you're sure? There isn't room for error in this." If she was anyone else her pause would sow doubt in his mind like a particularly invasive weed, but for her. "Give me 5 months, Sakura tells the room after a beat. "And then you'll know if it's possible." That's Sasuke, and the clench of his hands in his lap, the tension that coils visibly up and down his spine, shows that this is no easier for him than it is for Kakashi. It may even be harder considering his history with Sakura and his penchant for distrust, especially regarding those things precious to him. Sakura turns her impossible jade eyes towards the Uchiha now, and the firm set of her mouth softens a little though the fire doesn't. "No. I know it's possible, but by then I'll also know if I need help." Sasuke doesn't look entirely convinced, but then again, neither is Kakashi. "Do you even know what you want the new seal to be able to do? Are there any specifics we have at all?" The quietly anxious edge is creeping closer and closer to the surface of Sasuke's voice, and Kakashi thinks that even though it's a good question, soon he's going to have to either put a pause to this conversation or tell Sasuke to take a walk to get his anxiety under check. Sakura stops pacing, and bites her lip. "Actually, I'm not sure. Naruto, Kurama, what do you want from the new seal?" There is an awkward silence, and Kakashi wonders if Kurama and his blonde student existed in separate bodies, if they'd be looking at each other waiting for the other to speak. Begins Naruto's voice finally. "We haven't really gotten a chance to talk about it, but obviously I'd like for the seal to hurt less, and I'd like for Kurama to have full access to all his chakra and really any other freedoms. I mean, ideally we could just let him out all the way, but I'm pretty sure he's said before that would just kill me." Kakashi thinks he may be the only one who notices Sasuke's eyes flare with the red of the Sharingan and his clenched hands tighten further in his lap. The boy doesn't say anything though, still holding it together, and so Kakashi lets him be. "Yeah, that makes sense with how your current seal is anchored, unfortunately." Sakura is flipping through the journal in her hands again, brow furrowed. It's certainly another aspect of the seal we are going to have to figure out. Time to simplify and summarize, thinks Kakashi. Right, so broad team goals at the moment are as follows. 1. Don't get caught and killed. Wow, really? I hadn't realized that was on the docket. Sasuke bites out, head tilted back toward the ceiling and eyes squeezed tightly shut. Kakashi ignores him, allowing the Uchiha his defensive sharpness. He won't fault the boy for managing his anxiety to the best of his abilities. 2. Keep getting stronger so that when eventually we do get caught, we won't get killed. This time it's Naruto who interjects, popping his knuckles and grinning wide and bright. We can do that for sure. Damn, Konoha won't know what hit 'em if they come after us. Kakashi watches Sasuke's face soften at the familiar brashness and a small smile tugs across Sakura's focused demeanor as well. Kakashi doesn't know what they would do without Naruto's bulldozing optimism. 3. We figure out how to safely remove, rebuild, and perfect Naruto's seal. Sakura snaps Mito's journal shut and in a voice that sounds so much older, so much more weighty and unflinching than someone her age should be able to summon, promises, I won't let you all down. And all of us will help too. Kakashi gives all 3 of his kids the most genuine smile he can summon. I managed to figure out how to remove a curse mark on my lonesome, so, though I may not be as seal-minded as you, Sakura, I'll still do what I can. Carefully, making sure she's looking at him as he speaks, he continues. This doesn't all fall on your shoulders alone. We are in this together. Sakura blinks at him, the flicker of fear that Kakashi knows is still twined with her certainty flaring brighter for a moment. Naruto bounds over to his pink-haired friend and bumps his shoulder against hers like an excited puppy. Yeah. Together. We got out of the leaf and handled the curse mark in only a month. We got more than a year for my seal, so we've definitely got this. Don't jinx it, Dobe. Sasuke pushes to his feet, graceful through the fear that Kakashi knows he's still fighting. Naruto sticks his tongue out at the other boy and Sakura, still clutching the journal, softens even further. Kakashi watches them carefully as Naruto grins and loops an arm around her neck and sticks a fist bump out to Sasuke, who wanders closer, pulled by the gravity of a sharp-toothed smile and a love that has no room for doubt. Kakashi looks down at his letter to Iruka, still resting on the couch next to him. He had been wondering how to wrap it up, how to put a concise bow on the changes of the past month. He looks back up at his kids. At Sakura, brilliant like fire and twice as certain but still fighting against the belief that she has to make up for something, has to prove that she deserves to be standing with them, deserves to be trusted and depended on. At Naruto, strong and steady even as he buries the pain of loss and the fear of what's to come behind smiles and love for what they are building. At Sasuke, better than he's ever been but still too sharp, too brittle, and unsure how to navigate the difference between vulnerability and weakness. His kids. Kakashi picks up the pen and carefully at the bottom of the page writes, "We're getting stronger, and better, and we've got a long way to go still. We miss you." He watches the ink dry as Sasuke and Sakura start bickering over something and Naruto bounces on the balls of his feet, grinning and interjecting every few seconds. They'll be okay, but they have a lot to do. Chapter 19, Something I Am Missing. Sasuke had thought he was getting better. Scratch that, he knows he has been getting better. His time in the Uzushio archives has been some of the most peaceful he has felt since the destruction of his clan. Sasuke's nightmares are fewer and he hasn't had a single panic attack in the entire time here. Well, hadn't had one. It's such a stupid thing. Small. Unimportant in the grand scheme of things. It shouldn't have been a big deal at all. And yet, they had been sparring as a team. It's something they do every single day. Kakashi is not wrong in saying that they need to be ready for when their luck runs out and someone catches up with them. They are going to have to fight and they are going to have to win, because if they don't they're all as good as dead or worse. There is no room for error, and there so rarely is in the life of a shinobi, but now, with just the 4 of them against basically the world, well, Sasuke already knows the feeling of losing everything once and he would rather die than feel it again. So the 4 of them have been training and getting stronger. Naruto is steadier than he's ever been. His taijutsu is fierce and unpredictable and he hits like a fucking landslide. He's learned nearly a dozen new jutsu in the span of the past 3 weeks, and Sasuke knows that Kakashi has many more lined up in the wings once the Jinchuriki has perfected this first set. Sakura is improving in leaps and bounds too. She hasn't figured out how to effectively incorporate her Fuinjutsu into her fighting style yet, and so instead she's doubled down on other aspects of her martial prowess. She may not be as fast as Sasuke or hit as hard as Naruto, but she makes up for it in strategy and perfect form. Watching Sakura fight is like watching a textbook demonstration of deadliness come to life. According to Kakashi, they are easily Chunin level and still improving by leaps and bounds every week. Both of Sasuke's teammates are amazing and he's proud of them, happy for them. But buried under all the peace of being away from Konoha, safe in the archives and among people he cares deeply for, Sasuke feels like he's drowning in mud. He already was so strong for his age, and Kakashi tells him that he's making good progress. Sasuke is a genius, as everyone around him in Konoha always insisted on reminding him. While the praise was certainly one part simpering idiots trying to get on the last Uchiha's good side, it was never unfounded either. He has always been at the front of the pack, so he's not used to feeling like he's falling behind. But watching Naruto and Sakura grow so explosively, while he maintains the same steady strength and genuineness he's always had, makes Sasuke feel like the fucking walls are closing in around him. He's still learning and improving. He knows this. His medical ninjutsu gets better every day, but it's not enough. Even if he genuinely enjoys healing and knows intellectually that it may be the thing that keeps him from losing what's precious to him again, it feels like shit all in the face of Sakura's deadly precision or Naruto's blooming strength. Sasuke wakes nearly every night with the sound of Itaka's voice whispering like a phantom in the air and the word weak drawing tight round his throat like a noose. He's been trying to avoid the fear. He's positive he doesn't always succeed by the worried looks he gets from his teammates and the careful, considerate ones he gets from his sensei. But he tries anyway, and he works twice as hard to make up for his failures. It's not enough. During their evening spar, Sakura, once the last person he would ever worry about beating him, manages to break through his guard. She sends him flying backwards into a wall, and something inside Sasuke snaps. She is rushing to him immediately after it's happened, useless stupid apologies and concerns on her lips and a hand extended to help him up. Maybe she can see how pale he's gone, how frantic his eyes. He slaps her hand away and forces his trembling legs to help him stand. Everything sounds like it's underwater, ringing and distant to his ears. Sakura's eyes are hurt at his rejection, but she's trying to push through, asking if he's okay, if she injured him. He understands that she's trying to help, but it makes it so much worse, that she even could do damage to him, that she feels the need to worry about him. Kakashi is walking quickly toward them and Naruto is hurrying past him, both their faces concerned and caring and unblaming, and Sasuke can't. So he turns and he runs. He can hear them shouting behind him, can hear Naruto rushing to try and keep up, but Sasuke has always been faster. He finds a random passageway and sprints like he hasn't in a long time. He doesn't look which way he's going or try to follow a logical path. He just darts deeper into the twisting darkness of the Uzushio archives. Small dim lights flicker on as he rushes past, triggered by proximity seals. Sasuke never spares them a glance, simply fleeing blindly deeper into the mountain. He finally stops running after what feels like only a few moments, but may be closer to 10 minutes. Time feels unsteady. He's further back into the caves than he's ever been, than any of them have been. Here the floor is still covered in a thick layer of dust that's been undisturbed by their presence so far. Some slightly less panicking part of Sasuke's brain suggests that he finds a new scroll or book for Sakura as an apology for the way he's turned her success into a problem. God, he's an asshole. A weak, useless asshole. His team is growing stronger and here he is, barely any new skills to speak of, and he can't even be excited about their success without fucking it up. His vision swims again under the assault of his anxiety and self-loathing, and he veers out of the main tunnel into a random enclave crammed with shelves. He crashes to the ground, back against a shelf. Each breath feels as though it's being yanked from his chest by a fishing hook, and his thoughts spiral uselessly like a stupid little dog chasing its tail. Desperately trying to shake the screaming loose from his brain, Sasuke thunks his head back against the wood harshly, eyes squeezed tightly shut. He's so lost in his own thoughts that he doesn't notice the scroll roll from where it was set on the shelf above him until it falls and lands directly on top of his head. Sasuke flinches in surprise, eyes flashing open to take in the dark gray and silver-capped parchment that sits innocently on the floor where it's come to a stop in front of him. Baffled curiosity suspending his panic for a moment, he reaches forward and grabs the offending piece of paper. He unrolls it in his lap. From what he can tell after glancing over it for a few moments, the scroll looks and feels like a sealing contract. The old document is all curling, sprawling kanji with paragraphs upon paragraphs of promises, details, and stipulations. Furthermore, there is a latent buzz of chakra embedded in the scroll itself, a soft hum of energy like a small, sleeping creature. Sealing contracts are rare. Most animals and yokai that will bond with shinobi only offer a half-dozen contracts in total, some even less. Sasuke's vision is still swimming too much to read the details that are laid out before him, but he's drawn to the solitary paw print at the bottom of the page. It's wider and more contained than the print of one of Kakashi's ninkin, with the impression of short, sharp claws left in the ink. The print rests next to a blank seal mark, circular and complex on the outside with an inviting open space at its center. Sasuke can recognize a seal of binding when he sees one. It's a seal that takes blood and turns it oath, something powerful and life-changing that should take careful consideration and planning. Sasuke isn't sure if it's because of his still spiking anxiety or because of some other recklessness that the past months of uncertainty have allowed to root in his soul, but with barely a thought he raises a thumb to his mouth and with a harsh clip of his teeth draws a stream of blood. Without allowing his logical mind to rear its head and ask what the fuck he thinks he's doing, Sasuke drops his thumb to the binding seal and presses the blood into the blank space. Nothing happens for several seconds and he wonders if this contract is too old. Then there is a sound like the strangest cross between shattering glass and the rush of wind, and light flares bright enough that Sasuke clenches his eyes shut. He doesn't release his grip on the sealing contract though. The smell of summoning smoke fills the small room and Sasuke's ears immediately pick up the sound of another creature's breathing. He's almost scared to open his eyes and see what he's done. "Are you the human that called me here?" a silvery voice asks. Sasuke cracks one eye open. Sat on the ground before him, four paws gathered together under its body neatly and bright golden eyes locked on Sasuke, is a small cat. It has dark gray fur with the slightest stripes of a lighter gray down its face and spine, and its fur is soft and thick looking. As Sasuke watches for a few beats longer in baffled silence, a tail, no scratch that, two tails, sweep out from behind the small animal, stirring the thick dust into little whirls. The cat tilts its head, examining Sasuke just as Sasuke is examining it. It gives the air a careful sniff before offering somewhat curiously, "You seem like you are very upset." "Oh right," Sasuke was in the middle of having a panic attack. The wave of distress rises again, picking up right where it left off before Sasuke impulsively agreed to a binding contract with an unknown sealing species. Kakashi is going to kill him. Sasuke folds forward, breath coming in pants as he tries to get enough air into his spasming chest. Maybe there isn't enough air this deep in the caves. Maybe he's gone too far and this is how Sasuke Uchiha is finally going to die, alone and in the dark and just as uselessly as the rest of his family did. Darkness crashes in around the edges of his vision and all Sasuke knows is fear. It stays that way for a while. After, he really doesn't know how many minutes, he starts to calm down a little. He's sore and stiff from sitting on the stone floor and he's cold and exhausted. Above all that, however, the first sensation that funnels in through the static and emptiness is purring. Sasuke opens his eyes and sits up slightly from his hunched-over position to find that the little gray cat is curled in his lap, practically vibrating with the fierceness of its purrs. Sasuke doesn't remember it climbing onto him. Considering how he had curled forward under the weight of his panic attack, it must have forced its way under his arms to be closer to him. To help him. Golden eyes blink open and glance up at him, looking over his face with careful consideration. There is no judgment in those eyes, no pity. Sasuke is completely floored. "Are you better now, summoner?" the gray cat asks. "Why did you help me?" Sasuke responds instead of answering. He knows he's being rude, but he doesn't get it. "Because you were hurting and you signed our contract. Caring for you is my job now, as it is yours to care for me and mine." The cat offers, and it doesn't talk to Sasuke like this is something he should have known, which would be fair considering he signed the contract. But it doesn't. Sasuke stares at the creature some more. It's very small. Now that it's resting on top of him, Sasuke can feel that it weighs no more than a handful of kunao. Its fur is impossibly, distractingly soft and its two tails flip gently side to side. "What's your name?" Sasuke finally manages to get out. He notices that the soft gray fur of the little cat has clumped on the side where Sasuke had cried into its fur. The creature doesn't seem upset about this, instead pushing up from Sasuke's lap until it's seated again, furred face only inches away from his. "I am Mika of the northern mountain Nikomata. My dam was Ryo of the wide plains Nikomata and my sire is Haruo of the northern mountain Nikomata." Sasuke blinks several times taking all this in. The cat waits patiently as he does. "Okay, Mika. You are a girl." It's a shot in the dark but the cat gives a quiet rumbling purr almost like a laugh. "I am, summoner." "Okay. Great." The good news is Sasuke no longer feels like he's having a panic attack. The bad news is he does feel like in the conversation he is currently having with this cat he is proving to be the less effective communicator of the two of them. "Summoner." "Yes? Yes. Sorry. What is it?" Sasuke feels redness climb onto his pale cheeks as that quiet rumbling laugh sounds again. "What is your name?" Sasuke would absolutely be smacking himself in the face if it wouldn't make an even worse impression than he's already managed so far. "I'm Sasuke Uchiha." He wonders if he should be listing his family off like Mika did, but all things considered, he'd really rather not. Mika blinks at him in surprise. "An Uchiha? We were led to believe that all of your people were killed." Sasuke flinches before quietly managing "almost all of us. It's just me," and he has to fight through the words, "even now, even knowing that Itachi is no monster, my older brother." Mika nods thoughtfully and then says, "Losing family is hard. It puts a hole in you. My dam died when I was only a kitten. I understand and mourn your loss." Sasuke finds that, unlike in the past when people have tried to offer their sympathies and condolences, he actually believes that Mika cares. "Thank you," he tells the little feline quietly. She flicks her ears at him and gives another rumbling purr. "What can you and your pack? Is it a pack? Sorry, I've never had a summons before, or a cat." Mika raises one furred brow at him. It's a strangely human expression on the face of the feline but Sasuke feels like he's not allowed to point fingers about strangeness at the moment. "My people are a..." Mika seems to struggle for a moment, her two tails flipping in irritation. "There isn't a proper word in your language for what we call ourselves as a group, so I guess clan is the closest thing, and we aren't really cats in the traditional sense. What you know as the Niniko are our distant cousins. We hold no grudges against them but my clan, the Nikomata, are less." She pauses again, considering, before finally offering tame. Sasuke isn't sure exactly how wild and threatening the small gray ball of fluff in his lap could really be, even if she has two tails instead of one. "Right. What can you and your clan do then, like what are your abilities?" Almost as if she's repeating something from memory, Mika says primly, "We of the Nikomata are fast and dexterous. We have chakra-enhanced claws and sharp teeth that allow us to do great damage. The more powerful of us can shapeshift and disappear into shadows and some of us can manipulate natural chakra to heal or harm." Her ears flick back for a moment in what seems to be embarrassment. "I myself am only a juvenile. My litter was born 2 springs ago so I am still learning. However, my older brother and sisters, as well as other members of our clan will be a great asset to you in battle. You've already helped more than you know, honestly." Sasuke tells her. It's strange how genuinely he means the comfort too. Usually he doesn't much care for babying others in their feelings but something about the guileless golden eyes blinking up at him and the tears drying in gray fur make him feel that he may owe it to this little creature. She looks a little confused. "I really didn't do anything. At least nothing that even our civilian mothers can do for their kittens when they are distressed. Providing comfort and support is something though." Sasuke finds himself arguing, "For shinobi, without support nin and healers we would die young and foolishly." Mika considers this, perhaps. "And what is it you do, Summoner-san?" Somewhat startled by the change of topic and still off balance, Sasuke is about to open his mouth and spit that he doesn't do anything, that he's weak and useless, but then he pauses and thinks about what he insisted on only a moment ago. "I'm a healer." he says quietly. Mika's golden eyes are discerning and warm, and Sasuke feels like they are laying his vulnerabilities open in the gentlest way possible. Well then, your clan is lucky to have you, she tells him assuredly. Sasuke is still spiraling. This whole time he's been thinking of healing as something that was a desperate stopgap against the threat of loss, not something that actually made him strong or made him able to protect the people he loves. He's been watching Naruto learn to hit harder and Sakura learn to kill easier and decided that his efforts were nothing in comparison. Somewhere along the way, he convinced himself that there was less value in learning to heal a broken bone than there was in learning to break it. But he is, wrong, and his team has been trying to tell him so for weeks. Kakashi by smiling as he apologizes for not being able to assist more with his readings and in the same breath thanking Sasuke for his efforts. Sakura by stumbling to find him in his room late at night when her studies have kept her up as late as him to offer a chance at some practical experience curing migraines. Naruto by cheering with excitement the first time Sasuke's hands had glowed a soft green over the injured seal they had found together on the coast. Kurama by gruffly, regularly, pointing him towards places where there may be more texts on anatomy and trauma care and medical ninjutsu. His team has spent the past month telling him in every way they could that they value the path he's chosen, that they see it as necessary. This whole time Sasuke has thought himself weak for not learning to deal death like Kakashi, like Itachi. But maybe, he was wrong. The memory strikes him then. It slips past the guards he has placed so carefully around his childhood, the self-inflicted amnesia he strives for in thoughts of the child he had once been and of the person he had once loved more than anything else in the world. Itachi was always so careful to avoid exposing Sasuke to the horrors of the life he lived. People talked about his big brother's genius like some gift from the heavens, but Itachi never seemed to see it in that light. This particular night Sasuke, 5 years old and supposed to be in bed asleep, had snuck out to the back porch to watch the fireflies. There is no way Itachi hadn't heard him coming. Sasuke had only the most basic of ninja training then, and his steps were loud and inexperienced. Still, his older brother hadn't fled and hadn't tried to hide. Now looking back, Sasuke finds himself wondering if it was because the then 11-year-old was simply too tired to care, or if he wanted Sasuke to see what being a shinobi brought you. Or maybe Itachi just needed to be comforted and didn't know any other way to ask. When Sasuke had stepped onto the moonlit porch and spotted his older sibling, he had thought the other boy was covered in dark ink at first. The cool light of the moon above made the blood look darker, less vibrantly red than it actually was. Sasuke walked forward, reaching young, worried fingers for his big brother. "Aniki? Are you okay?" Itachi hadn't looked at him even as Sasuke's small hand came to rest on his blood-soaked sleeve. Sasuke was old enough to know that his brother was supposed to be on a big important Jonin mission until tomorrow afternoon, and yet here he was, sat like a statue on the Uchiha family porch, covered in slowly drying blood and staring blankly at the moon. Sasuke hadn't known what to do, hadn't even really understood why his big brother was upset. So he had just done what he normally did when Itachi came home from a mission, which was to climb into his lap and tell the older boy about his day. Sasuke had talked about the frog he had caught at recess, and about the kunao throwing lessons he had with Dad, and about the yakisoba Mom made for dinner, and about how he was sure there were leftovers for Itachi in the fridge. Itachi just sat and listened, still except for the fine trembles that ran through him occasionally and the slightest hitching breaths. After a while, Sasuke doesn't remember how long, only remembers his young eyes starting to grow heavy and his ramblings less cohesive. Itachi had finally spoken. One of his bloody hands had come up to run through Sasuke's hair tenderly. His voice was always so quiet, so gentle, and even in that moment, when the older boy was clearly teetering on the edge of a darkness so deep that even the Sharingan couldn't make out the bottom of it, he had sounded kind. "Sasuke, if you ever get the chance, if you can ever find a way to do it that won't kill you, run from this life as fast and as far as you can. The life of a shinobi is, well, you can't call what a Shinigami does life by definition." He'd closed his haunted eyes then, clenching them tight against some horror that Sasuke could neither see nor understand. "Nii-san. I don't." He started, but Itachi had just shushed him, dropping his face into Sasuke's messy dark hair and wrapping shaking arms tight around him. "Don't be like me, Otauto. Don't make death the only thing you have to offer." The memory breaks and Sasuke finds that his face is wet with tears. It's been a long time since Sasuke let himself remember something about Itaka that wasn't the way his hands looked covered in their parents' blood or the way his voice had sounded as cold and disinterested as ice when he told Sasuke to live only to grow strong enough to kill him. When he'd called him weak. Mika is watching him thoughtfully as he reaches up to wipe his eyes. Sorry, must be the dust. Sasuke tries even though something tells him that the gray cat is going to see right through it. Mika agrees, very dusty in here. Terrible for the eyes and nose. Sasuke nods and gives the cat an honest if slightly damp smile. Thank you. For showing up and helping and, I don't know, not making me feel like a weakling. Mika tilts her head, do the people in your clan often make you feel like a weakling? Sasuke thinks again about his team, about how they depend on him, reach out to him for help, trust him to watch their backs and keep them safe. No. They treat me like I'm strong. Then you are strong. Mika affirms. No, Sasuke says in the whispers of worthlessness and run away before you break this too that have followed him here all the way from Konoha and the blood-stained halls of his family home rear their ugly head again and Sasuke finally hears them for what they are. Lies. Excuses. Fear. No, he says again and smiles at the little gray cat this time, I'm not strong yet. But I'm going to get strong. For them, and for me. Mika smiles her small, curled cat smile. The Nikomato will be right there with you, summoner. Just call me Sasuke. And he picks up the little gray cat and begins to make his way slowly out of the archives. He's sure his team is very worried about him. Chapter 20, Seek Absolution. Sasuke waits until the mountain archives have been silent long enough that he's absolutely positive that his team is all asleep before sneaking out towards the training room. Mika is curled around his shoulders, golden eyes blown wide and black in the near darkness of the caves as he creeps down the hall. Sasuke is glad that she's so quiet. He's really not looking to wake his team and get caught. It's not exactly that Sasuke is hiding that he has summons now, but he may be avoiding the inevitable confrontation with Kakashi over it. His sensei is absolutely understanding and kind in a way that you wouldn't guess by looking at him, but he's also meticulous and very careful and he expects the same from his students. He's going to tear Sasuke apart for signing a summoning pact on a whim. So Sasuke is just waiting for a good moment to bring it up. And in the meantime, he's going to start training with Mika, who seems to have assigned herself to him as her personal project. That way, when he does finally get the nerve to tell Kakashi, he has something to show for his recklessness. Sasuke is so deep in thought about his plans to remain undiscovered that he fails to consider what it means that the lights are already on in their training room when he stealthily ducks through the door. Sakura, crouched on the scroll-covered floor with her pink hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, ink on her cheek and a guilty look in her wide jade eyes, stares at him. He stares back, suddenly painfully aware of how bright the light is and how obvious the cat resting on his shoulder is. There are several beats of awkward silence. It's been 3 days since Sasuke's panic attack after she beat him sparring and he may have apologized but things have still been weird. Finally, Sakura, in a slightly baffled-sounding whisper asks. Why do you have a cat? Sasuke, equally baffled but mostly just avoidant, responds. How did you walk past my room without me hearing you? Sakura narrows her eyes at him. I asked you first. The part of Sasuke that will always be a younger sibling rears its pugnacious head and he snarks back, I asked you second. The two of them watch each other for a few beats longer, Mika glancing rapidly between the two of them like she's watching a particularly engaging game of toss. Fine, Sakura hisses finally, rolling the sleeve up on her baggy sweater to reveal a seal painted against her wrist. Sasuke thinks he may vaguely recognize it from their sealing unit at school but even without being certain he's able to piece the clues together well enough. A silencing seal? He asks. She nods and then asks pointedly, the cat. HN. Sasuke murmurs, unable to keep from shifting awkwardly as he tries to figure out how to explain in a way that won't have her shouting at him. Mika doesn't give him the chance. She hops lightly down from his shoulders and pads over to Sakura, carefully stepping around her scrolls. She stops in front of the other teenager and extends one soft gray paw as if she's waiting for a handshake. Hello. She mews in her sweet, chime-like voice. Sakura's mouth drops open. Mika, with the determination that Suzuki has come to know as one of her most defining characteristics, continues speaking. I'm Mika of the Northern Mountains Nikomata, one of Suzuki-kun's new summons. You are his teammate, the Fuinjutsu specialist, Sakura Harano, correct? Sakura's mouth hangs for a few beats longer before she summons the willpower to snap it shut. She blinks, shakes her head, and then reaching to grip Mika's small paw manages, I am pleased to meet you. Sakura looks back up at Suzuki, and he can't quite read the expression in her eyes. The silence holds for several more beats before finally Sakura's mouth twists into a slight smirk and she says, Kakashi-sensei is going to give you hell for this. Suzuki sighs, partly in relief that she isn't going to get pissed at him but also in agreement. I know, it was reckless, I just dash. PSSHH, she cuts him off, the spark of teasing is obvious on her face. Recklessness aside, you picked cats. What's he going to think? What's Pakun going to think? Suzuki blinks in shock and then a slight smile slides across his face. We are closer to yokai than simple cats, Sakura-san, says Mika, gentle but still prim as she swishes her two tails pointedly into Sakura's line of sight. Suzuki has been corrected on this several times as well. It's not that the Nikomata particularly mind being called cats, they just also seem very determined to maintain the distinction between their kind and your average, mouse-hunting tabby. Suzuki moves further into the room, peering at the scrolls piled in front of Sakura on the floor of the dojo. He doesn't miss the strange look of panic and guilt that flashes across her face as he does so, but he also really doesn't understand it. What does she feel like she needs to hide? What are you working on? He asks carefully, kneeling and offering a hand to Mika, who bumps against him fondly. Sakura opens her mouth. Closes it. Her pale green eyes dart skittishly to the ink pots and brushes at her side. Right then, Suzuki thinks, what would Naruto do? Is it stuff for the 8 trigrams? He's trying to prompt her and show her that he's been paying attention to how hard she's been working the past week. To be supportive and all that shit. Instead, the guilt in her gaze intensifies tenfold. I know I should be working on it, and I was until everyone went to bed. I've been making good progress and not slacking or anything, and I know you are super worried about Naruto, and so am I, so please don't think dash. Sakura. She jerks her head up, a slightly wild, fearful look about her. Suzuki runs a hand over his face and sighs. God, they are such a mess. All of them are. Kakashi with his paranoid vigilance, and Naruto with his deathbed optimism, and him with his, well, everything. But he forgets that Sakura is a mess too sometimes. A high-functioning mess maybe, but damn. I'm not judging, okay? Suzuki tries. I genuinely want to know because you're my teammate and I care about your success. He's pretty sure he sounds constipated, so he flicks his eyes to Mika to see how he's doing. The little gray summons nods fiercely and then jerks her head several times in Sakura's direction. It's fine that you aren't working on the 8 trigrams. He really feels like he's shooting in the dark here, but she's clearly hiding in the dojo working on whatever this is after she thought everyone was asleep for some reason, so. We trust you and it's cool. Another glance at Mika, who continues nodding. It's cool that you have your own projects. I'd love to hear about them. And maybe help if I can. He winces. Really, Naruto with his endless, perfect words would have been so much better at this. However, the panic and guilt has faded from Sakura's eyes nearly entirely and has been replaced with one pink arched brow and a slightly crooked smile. That was kind of painful to listen to, honestly. Mika sighs and then sweetly says, we'll work on it. Communication is an important aspect of team dynamics. If it had been anyone else, Suzuki may have glared, but even in the short few days he's known her, Mika has wormed her way into his heart so effectively that he cannot summon his usual vitriol, even after such a pointed critique of his. Okay, yes, they are lacking communication skills. Sakura gives a short, snorting laugh and then quiets as she runs her hands over the scroll in front of her. It's very, very old from what Suzuki can see. Its edges are browning and the dark blue ink scrawled across it is fading to near illegibility in certain places. Sakura has filled in those gaps with tiny, neatly scribbled notes and diagrams. Next to the yellowing scroll are her sketches from more than a month ago of some of the seals from the village. Suzuki really has no chance of recognizing which ones they are from form alone, but he can make out the kanji labeling at least some of them as key seals. He has absolutely no idea how that could be of any value, but Sakura considers her words for a few beats before she begins carefully, "Well, I'm actually working on two different things at the moment." Suzuki and Mika both nod encouragingly. The pinkette taps on the old, browning scroll in front of her before continuing, her voice quietly fierce. "I know we are all worried about Naruto and Kurama and the 8 trigrams, but I haven't forgotten about what Orochimaru did to you, and I'm also not foolish enough to think that we've heard the last of him." The mention of the snake Sannin has Suzuki's skin crawling with unease immediately. The now freed space on his neck where the curse mark had once crouched seems to burn for a moment. He rubs a hand across the spot and tries to ignore the way he feels, even now, as if slitted yellow eyes are peering at him like something to dissect. Sakura doesn't miss his discomfort, and neither does Mika. His summons leaps from where she had been sitting on the ground to Suzuki's shoulders with ease. Mika drapes herself around his neck, letting out a soft rumble as she bumps her nose gently against the bottom of his cheek. The vulnerable, crawling feeling at the back of his skull fades under the Nekomade's ministrations almost immediately, and Suzuki breathes out long and slow, putting a conscious effort into relaxing. Sakura watches the interaction thoughtfully but chooses to not say anything, which Suzuki appreciates instantly. He may be getting better, but that doesn't mean he wants his vulnerabilities pointed out. Instead, she traces a thoughtful finger over the faded ink in front of her and explains. "Orochimaru is 100 miles above us skills-wise, according to what Kakashi-sensei has told us. If he decides to come after you again, we're gonna be in a really dangerous spot, so I'm working on a theory, I guess, about a way we could mitigate that threat." Suzuki blinks at her in surprise. He certainly hadn't forgotten about Orochimaru or the Twisted Genius's obsession with him, but he had assumed that compared to all the other things his team was dealing with, it was pretty low on the priority list. But apparently Sakura doesn't think that. "What's your idea?" Mika asks the pinkette. The little cat's voice is the most serious Suzuki has heard it sound to date. He hasn't actually told her about Orochimaru yet, but apparently Mika is discerning enough to have realized that this is something important. Sakura takes a few seconds longer to respond than she normally would, most likely still adjusting to the fact that the creature asking the question is a small gray cat yokai, but she shakes it off and begins to explain. "I actually got the idea that afternoon a few weeks ago when I found the referential text for the seals placed on the shrine that Suzuki and I saw when we first arrived in Whirlpool." Suzuki nods, unsettled even now as he remembers the small dusty memorial tucked among the decades-old devastation. "Basically, the seal functions to make a vessel, I suppose is the best word for it. Remember a soul?" Suzuki and Mika blink slowly at the pinkette, both equally clueless as to what the young woman in front of them is talking about. Sakura huffs out a slightly frustrated breath and says, "What I mean is, when the seal is placed, it designates an object as the place for the remnants of a soul to be stored. It binds pieces of who someone once was to a specific location." Suzuki taps his fingers, and gives a slight hum of only slightly fabricated understanding, and Mika asks, "And it was on the shrine to hold memories of the deceased?" "Yes." Sakura nods fervently. Basically, family members or loved ones would bind a piece of the deceased person's memories to the shrine so that they could always return to that spot and feel their presence. The seal uses a diacritic imprint, not unlike what a sealing contract uses, based on blood and chakra to create a lasting impression in the seal's recall and dash. "Sakura, how does that help us with Orochimaru?" He doesn't mean the question to come across as sharp as it does, but he also knows that Sakura can and will ramble about sealing for ages if they let her, and even with Mika around his shoulders he's still tense. Now that the possibility has been laid before him, he wants to know her plan against the snake Sannin like air. "Right, sorry." Her eyes cast down and the flicker of worry returns. "Gods damn it, Suzuki is such a dick." "It's fine, I'm not mad, just dash." "Please continue, Sakura-kun. How does the shrine seal apply to this Orochimaru?" Suzuki's shoulders sag slightly in relief for his summons input. He cares about Sakura, would take a blade for her without a moment's hesitation, but he still doesn't really know how to talk to her. Sakura smiles at Mika gratefully and slightly awkwardly before continuing. "Basically, what I'm trying to do is stabilize the seal's base matrices enough for it to be possible to place on a person instead of just an inanimate object. Suzuki's mind is spinning, beginning to see where his teammate may be going with this, but simplify. Mika flicks him in the face pointedly with one of her tails. Please, he adds immediately, hating that the petulance creeping into his voice isn't completely inaudible. Sakura narrows her eyes at him slightly, a flare of annoyance mixing with her uncertainty, but she pushes on. To put it simply, Orochimaru's entire plan, his entire life, exists on his ability to hop bodies. It's why he wanted you. Suzuki nods and fights down the shiver of fear at the terrifying memory of the pale-faced, mad-eyed ninja looking at him like one would a particularly lovely coat. So I'm going to lock the bastard's soul in his current body. I'm going to bind it to his form so completely that he can never shed his skin again. He's staring and his tongue feels leaden in his mouth. Suzuki doesn't know what he can possibly say that is an adequate response to finding out his teammate, the girl who once treated him like a trophy to be won, is inventing a way to destroy an immortal just because the man hurt him. He starts. It's not finished yet. She talks over him, a flash of self-doubt on her face again like she's afraid he won't believe her or something. I still have so much to figure out in the original memoriam seal before I'm at a place where I can even begin reworking it to be viable on a living form, but the theory is solid I think and dash. Suzuki grabs her face and, yanking her forward, presses his forehead against hers. Shut up, you damn chatterbox, he says, and Sakura does, either stunned by the gesture of fondness or the affection that is overflowing from his voice. Maybe both. It's not like they haven't been close until this moment. Sakura is his teammate and he knows that none of them would be here without her, but even still Suzuki has always been a bit wary of her, a bit distant. Sakura seemed to approach him with the same hesitancy. There is an unavoidable snag that exists in their relationship, a history that neither of them knows how to talk about or apologize for. So instead they've both taken to pretending like the discomfort isn't there at all and instead let Naruto's loud brash love roll over any awkwardness between them. But now. Thank you, so much. For doing this. Suzuki whispers into the delicate space between them and the smile that curls across his pink-haired teammate's face in response is soft and wonder-filled and completely honest. Honesty is not something that either of them is good at. Suzuki hides his fears and his weaknesses instinctually and Sakura wears a different face for every person she encounters, switching them out like carnival masks. They are both liars and trust doesn't come easy to them. Vulnerability only gets you tossed aside by those you love, after all. But now, in this space, with the silence of the Uzushio archive surrounding them and the smell of ink and of the evening's dinner and the echoes of Sakura's promise still hanging heavy in the air, maybe they can be something more. Of course, Sakura finally manages, voice nearly cracking on the words, I promised you that first night, didn't I? I'm going to protect you. Naruto and Sensei too. Suzuki sits back and he can feel the helpless smile on his own face reflecting back at her because he believes it. A promise for a promise then, the swelling feeling in his heart prompts him to say, you keep us safe and I swear to heal us when you can't. She nods fiercely and the brightness in her eyes is one part unshed tears and one part joy. The fist she extends to him has only been a symbol for a few months now, but the weight it carries is stark. It's an oath. He bumps her fist with his own, and it's one of those moments that feels important and precious, and Suzuki is suddenly so blindingly glad that he is alive here in this place, surrounded by these people. Sakura drops her hand. Her smile, still almost giddy, turns a little mischievous. She teases, you know, for a second when you grabbed my face like that I really thought you were going to try and kiss me. Suzuki utterly fails to keep the instant grimace off his face at the idea and Sakura barks out a laugh in response and then presses a hand to her chest, making a cartoonishly affronted face at him. Suzuki. I'm so hurt. Would you stop? You don't want to kiss me either. He hisses back at her and his face is so damn red. Why are they talking about kissing? Leaning back on her hands, Sakura tilts her head thoughtfully and then says, honestly, I really don't. Thank God. Her smile turns dangerously mischievous again and really, Suzuki is beginning to think she is spending far too much time talking to Kurama. Besides, we all know who you really want to kiss dash. You said you were working on another project too. He may be yelling, but honestly, at this point he would take Kakashi's wrath over so much as a moment more of this conversation. Sakura laughs again, free and unapologetic, and Suzuki really, truly, loves her. Her amusement finally receding, Sakura looks quietly down at the seals in front of her. I am working on another project, but it's for me and so I'm not sure. The hesitation is back and Sasuke rolls his eyes, and then stands and moves to sit next to her. Show me, he commands, and Sakura blinks away the surprise on her face and then nods. Fair warning, it's a little crazy. Crazier than contracting with summons on a whim. Sasuke asks, lifting a hand to scratch Mika under the chin. A pause and then Sakura concedes, well, when you put it that way. And so she shows him, and it is crazy, and it's going to make her untouchable. Sasuke can't wait. Check the description for the links to the author.